Let's bring this and more to our panel. We have Denise Gitsham today, NewsNation contributor, Republican strategist. We also have Nicole Renner, who's a Democratic strategist, and we have Niall Stanage, who's the White House columnist for The Hill. You know, the NewsNation politics are powered by The Hill. I think you've heard that one before, right, Niall? All right, let's talk about some of these issues that we have. I think we should start there in the Middle East. Let me play a clip, folks, from President Trump and relate this back to the United States, because he was asked a question at the G7 today, and here's how it went.
What would it take for the U.S. to get involved in this conflict militarily?
I don't want to talk about that.
Denise, what would you say about the U.S., of course, is involved to the extent that we're helping out the Israelis shoot down missiles, among other things?
Well, I'm certainly not surprised that he doesn't want to talk about it, because he doesn't want to put any of his cards on the table. He also can't afford to let it appear as though America was somehow proactively involved in the planning or execution of what Israel did. And so he's standing back, and this aligns with his America First vision, which is that he doesn't want to engage in the multilateral front with diplomatic statements, and he prefers strong unilateral leadership, America first, and literally doesn't want to engage or kowtow to anyone else's perspective on what that should be. So it makes a lot of sense that he would say that in the setting that he did.
No, I'll pick up on that, because I keep referring to this journal report about how Iran might have wanted to make some sort of a deal. It seems like they're going to Trump and saying, hey, can you help us out here?
Yeah, I mean, to pick up on Denise's point, politically in the US, to me, one of the interesting splits or divides in all of this is between the MAGA wing of the Republican Party and the more old-style or establishment wing, not just on Israel, although that's part of it, but a MAGA wing that is much more skeptical of American foreign interventionism generally. And certainly we're seeing, for the first time in my lifetime, very prominent conservative media commentators really raising questions about the closeness of the United States to Israel. Yes, there are extremely pro-Israel Republican Congress people as well, and senators, but that divide, I think, is really interesting.
Let's talk about it for a few minutes. Adding to the commentators that you talk about, members of Congress as well, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, MAGA, right? Here's her post on X. Unfortunately, list of fakes are becoming quite long and exposed themselves quickly. Anyone slobbering for the U.S. to become fully involved in the Israel-Iran war, not America First, not MAGA. Nicole, you want to give us your thoughts, and then we'll go to Denise on this so-called split?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like the Republicans, this is putting it full display what we sort of already were seeing with Russia and Ukraine, which is this desire for some of the party to still be people who are, supportive of the U.S. being involved either, tangentially or directly with these conflicts, and really seeing it as defending democracy. And those who think America First is much more of an isolationist, viewpoint, which is really like, if we shouldn't put ourselves into anybody else's business. But I think what we do have to keep in mind is that, Israel does have the right to defend herself, and it is our strongest ally in that area of the world. And this is an important thing for both parties to remember going forward.
Is this an issue, Denise, where the old school Republicans still have a voice? Like, I interviewed Donald Trump Jr. today, and he was talking about building the so-called MAGA bench and this kind of thing. So he certainly represents that part that Niall and Nicole are talking about of the party, but do the Lindsey Grahams of the world and those types of Republicans still get a say? I mean, how do you see this?
Well, as a Republican, I find it embarrassing that people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who know nothing about international warfare and know nothing about keeping Americans safe abroad, there's 40,000 Americans in that region. Does she not care about those people? And I think it's appalling that she would ignore the words of Trotsky, who said, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. The best way to prevent a war is to decisively end Iran's nuclear enrichment capabilities, full stop, period. And Trump has said very clearly that America First will mean whatever he decides it does. So no one's going to come around and try to manipulate the president into doing what he knows is in the best interest of Americans and world peace.
Now, let me end on the Don Jr. I mentioned that we interviewed him today. Why? Well, it's 10 years to the day from when Donald Trump, now president, came down that escalator over at Trump Tower, right? So, we talked, the whole interview aired last hour. You can watch it online, but it was interesting. We got into all kinds of different topics, whether it's his own business dealings, conflicts his father might have with some of that, crypto, you name it. But we also talked about his own political ambitions a little bit, and here's a clip from that portion of the interview.
I want to make sure that this movement, goes well beyond my father and his 4 years. I want to make sure that we, create that bench of America First warriors.
It's 10 years, right, since your father came down the escalator in this building, really got into politics, and now, say, 10 years from now, is Donald Trump Jr. the name on the...
I have no plans on doing any of that right now. It was really about finding the people who want to do that. I think my primary focus, you need both.
Yeah.
Right? You need people who understand that movement in politics, but you also need those people in the private sector.
All right, so whatever you think of Donald Trump Sr., the current president, he did change the political world 10 years ago on this day, right, Niall? So let's talk, all three of you can weigh in on this, on the future of this movement, because it plays in directly to the conversation we were just having and the split that you brought up. You first, Niall.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, there is no question at all that the current president has transformed American politics since that escalator ride. Now, of course, the country is divided pretty much 50-50 as to whether he has transformed it for the better or for the worse. But in relation to that movement, Connell, I think you bring up a really interesting point. We get accustomed to talking about the Republican establishment, meaning the non-MAGA wing. But that establishment has really been displaced. The MAGA insurgents have basically beaten that establishment. And now the establishment of the Republican Party is that Trumpian wing. Right. Whether Don Jr. ultimately assumes the mantle is a different question, but it is Trump's party now. There's no question about that at all.
A lot of people think it was Don who brought in J.D. Vance, or at least helped, and these other, who's also younger than Don Jr. So, Nicole, looking at it from your point of view as a Democrat, it's different. I mean, it's an interesting time kind of to reflect 10 years later about how the parties have changed. Again, no matter what your opinion is of President Trump's politics, but the different factions, working class, all the things that have happened in the last 10 years. What about the future of that movement versus the Democrats, how they counter it, Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it started with the Tea Party, and Trump really seized on it, has transformed their party. And I would agree with, my colleague here that that's more the quote establishment, because that's so much of the grassroots base now. And it is up for grabs whether it's, a family that carries it on. And that's not new. We've seen it with the Bushes. We see it with the Kennedys. It's not new for families to make politics their business. Or if it's somebody else, sort of on that side of Byron Dorgan, who comes in and is sort of the leader of the MAGA element. But I think what both parties, Democrats are struggling with it right now and trying to figure out how is going after that working class and how to be the populace, right? And we see a lot of that in the trade and that. And so this is really going to be the battle of like, who takes that mantle, who is articulating that future Americans so that they feel like they're getting the better deal and that they're getting the change they want. And what party are the American people going to reward with that? And that is something that Democrats, are dealing with and coping with and trying to figure out how to get back into their camp.
Yeah, it's been tough.
They're the blue collar
for Democrats family. On that part of it. No, it's been tough for them to figure out the counter and how to counter. All right, well, we're basically out of time, but we can't have the Republican on the panel not wrap this up. So there you go, Denise. Go ahead.
I'm sure that Donald Trump Jr. would love to be the heir apparent. I think that only Donald Trump, the president that we have now, is the guy that can carry the message and unite the party in a way that he has and bring in new people and new constituents, as y'all were talking about, the fight over the working class. We'll see, right? It all depends on what happens in our nation at the time and who they're running against, because that determines more than anything who ends up taking the mantle and running with it.
Denise and Niall and Nicole, thanks to all three of you. Good discussion on all these important topics of the day.